We don't serve people like you." The words struck the marble floor like a verdict. Short, cold, no gavel needed. The entire room understood the sentence had been delivered. Adrian Cole stood there, jacket wrinkled, shoes stained with street dust. From the high ceiling, crystal chandeliers hung like hundreds of blazing eyes, yet every gaze beneath them was dark, cold, sharp as shattered glass. Celeste Marlowe, the floor manager, didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice glided, velvet smooth yet steel hard. The words weren't aimed at one man. They were aimed at an entire class, a declaration of, "You don't belong." From a nearby table, Sterling Voss let out a short, dry laugh. Only 3 syllables, but enough to turn the room into a silent chorus. Spoons tapped crystal glasses, softly, the faint sound like hidden applause. Each metallic note striking glass was a whispered agreement, a quiet, "That's right." Behind the polished wood podium, Julian Pike, the young receptionist, froze. The menu in his hand trembled, not from a draft, but from fear. On the glowing screen in front of him, the name Cole Group was spelled out clearly. Yet Celeste's glance, cold as a knife's edge, sealed his lips shut. He chose silence. Adrian didn't argue. He didn't rage. He simply placed a card on the counter. Black, heavy, with steel edges glinting under the lights. Centurion. A card that the entire room knew spoke louder than any printed word. Silence followed. But it wasn't neutral silence. It was muffled laughter, nods hidden behind glasses of wine, mocking glances that didn't need words. Celeste raised her chin, lips curling into a smile as thin as a razor. "Fake cards are everywhere these days?" The room exhaled in relief. A chuckle slipped from one corner, then another. The wave spread, quiet but certain, like glass walls splintering under pressure. No one wanted the truth. They wanted a spectacle. 2 large men emerged from the hallway's shadows. Black suits, ties perfectly straight. A firm hand landed on Adrian's shoulder, not brutal, but unyielding. The gesture said more than words. "You don't belong here. We'll remove you, like a stain on a white cloth." Adrian didn't resist. He stood still, eyes steady. Yet it was that calmness that thickened the air. While the room expected to see an intruder dragged away, he simply remained unmoving, a mirror of silence, forcing them to confront themselves. Celeste crossed her arms, posture like a statue under glaring light. Sterling Voss leaned back. In his chair, lips curved in the smirk of a man who believed he'd won. Julian Pike bowed his head, swallowing shame and cowardice down his throat. The glass revolving door waited, reflecting the figure of the man about to be expelled. A wordless exile carried out in silence, witnessed and tacitly approved by the room. Adrian Cole, once a dishwasher in bleach-scented basements, once curled up on damp sacks of rice. Now the owner of an entire restaurant chain, yet beneath chandeliers, in this palace of light, they still saw him as a shadow, nameless, worthless. But what they didn't know, the very moment they believed they had erased him, was the moment they exposed their truest selves. And this was only the beginning. But what about you? If you had been seated at one of those tables, watching a man forced out simply for not fitting in, would you rise to make sure he was no longer invisible, or bow your head in silence, pretending you had seen nothing? Liszt Nocturne towered over Fifth Avenue like a crystal fortress. Marble walls gleamed so bright they reflected every passing footstep, chandeliers dripping down like artificial eclipses. Here, food was only an excuse. What truly ran the restaurant wasn't the kitchen, nor the floor. It was a social machine, polished smooth as glass. Who was seen, who was erased, who was called a distinguished guest, who was dismissed as an obstruction. The revolving glass doors were not merely an entrance. They were a sieve, Crossing them, a person was sorted by a glance before they even spoke. And that was exactly what made Adrian Cole understand what he was about to face. He had once been on the other side of that door. In the damp basement where dishwashers growled like beasts, bleach stung the skin and seeped into pores. His bare hands burned red, fingers cracked and calloused from endless soap water. A coarse coat stained with grease, shoes split at the heel, soles soaked through, his back pressed against damp rice sacks that served as his only pillow. Among the barrage of shouted orders, "Fire! Pick up!" Like an unending volley of gunfire, he bowed his head. Scrubbed, stacked. Down there, no one asked your name. They only counted clean plates. Servers swept past, perfume lingering in the air, eyes sliding over him as though he were just another stain on the floor. Adrian existed, but remained unseen. A moving shadow, but shadows taught him how to see. He watched how managers offered different smiles to different guests, wide for leather jackets, thin for worn coats. He memorized the hours of deliveries, the ritual of safes unlocking, and the way cashiers counted bills as though checking a pulse. Every tiny detail he recorded in an invisible ledger in his mind. Each overtime shift was a lesson. Each scolding is a signal. He began to grasp. A restaurant was never just food. It was a stage for power. And on that stage, a dishwasher would forever be a prop. Then he left that basement. A small diner rented on a street corner. Wood floors that creaked. A crooked hand-painted sign. An old gas stove wheezing smoke. He scrubbed the floor himself, tied his shoelaces before each shift, and cooked every dish with his own hands. Customers were few. The first came out of curiosity. The next stayed because of the sauce drifting out the door. But when they left, what they remembered was his gaze. A gaze free of judgment. They didn't remember the price. They remembered being treated as human. The diner survived weeks when the electricity bill couldn't be paid, nights when rain leaked down walls. It endured not through ads, not through connections, but through a simple creed: dignity first. Guests might forget the food, but they would never forget their own dignity. And that was what brought them back. Brick by brick, it grew. From one diner to another. From one to a chain. From a chain to a group. Cole hospitality was not born of capital, but of a memory, of being treated as trash in a kitchen basement. That memory became a vow. No one under his roof would ever be forced into invisibility. Yet Fifth Avenue still gleamed with places like Lis Nocturne, where spotless tablecloths hid every stain, golden chandeliers softened even the sharpest insult, and silence was dressed up as politeness, when in truth it was complicity. The contrast was raw: a frayed mop against a gold-engraved watch, torn shoes against starched napkins, sweat in a blistering kitchen against chilled wine. These weren't just details. There were rules of stratification, a miniature society, closed, self-assured, deciding who was worthy to sit down and who must remain outside. Adrian knew it well. When his hand pushed the revolving glass door tonight, he wasn't just stepping into a restaurant. He was walking straight into the heart of the system that had once erased him from the map of dignity. A system draped in velvet to conceal its rotting cracks. The revolving glass door groaned through a turn. Light from the chandeliers poured down, reflecting the figure of the man stepping back inside. Adrian Cole had not vanished as they thought. He stood there, gray coat faded, heels worn thin, but posture unbending, eyes cold and sharp as a blade. The room held its breath. No one had imagined the man just expelled would have the audacity to return. Knives and forks clattered to a stop, their sound brittle. A few guests still held up their phones to record, but their hands trembled, images warping on the screen. Celeste Marlowe slammed her heel onto the marble, the echo cracking like a whip. She stormed toward Adrian, the mask of trained composure twisting into rage. Her voice hissed, sharp and ragged, No longer the calm of power, but the fury of someone, watching that power slip away. "Who gave you permission to come back? Security! Keep him out! There is no place for people like him!" Each word she spat was a blade, but beneath the anger flashed a glint of panic for anyone keen enough to see. She knew his presence shook the very ground beneath her authority. Sterling Voss erupted into laughter, straining to steer the room as before. "Ridiculous! A drifter thinks he can sit on Fifth Avenue?" His laugh rang out, but hollow. A few tables chuckled politely, yet the sound thinned quickly. Sterling felt a tightness in his chest. The man before him was neither afraid nor evasive. That calm gaze made Sterling suddenly hear his own laughter as empty, clattering like a hollow crystal glass. Behind the reception podium, Julian Pike's body was taut as wire. The words still burned in his mind. Cole Group. Reservation. Confirmed. He had seen it, knew with certainty this man had the right to be there. But Celeste was shrieking, her eyes daggers at his throat. Julian swallowed dryly, hands trembling over the keyboard. Two voices fought in his head. "If I speak, I lose my job. If I stay silent, I betray myself." His throat closed. His lips parted, but sound died before it formed. His silence weighed heavily than the shouting around him. Two guards appeared, shoulders broad, faces blank. One clamped a hand on Adrian's shoulder. Yet instead of dragging him away, he hesitated. The man before him did not struggle, did not plead. He stood still, so composed that the guard's hand felt heavy, as if pressing against stone rather than flesh. Adrian's eyes shifted toward him, slow, steady, without anger or fear. Just in that flicker, the guard shivered. Why did a man branded as a beggar have eyes that made him feel small? Within the dining hall, collective complicity began to fracture. At first, guests had raised phones as if for sport. Now their laughter faltered, fragmented. A few lowered their cameras, unwilling to meet his gaze. Others turned away, as though their mockery from minutes earlier had curdled into a weight on their backs. The air thickened, transformed from cheap spectacle to a heaviness hard to swallow. Celeste screamed louder, her voice cracking. "Get him out! This restaurant has standards, and I will not let a saboteur soil this place." Yet the more she yelled, the clearer her fear became. Guests no longer applauded. Sterling's laughter dried into a stiff-lipped silence. Julian bowed his head, hands trembling. Even the guards failed to drag Adrian out. He hadn't spoken a word. He only stood there, eyes sweeping across every face. No gesture was needed. That gaze alone sliced away their masks. Celeste, the loudest, was the most shaken. Sterling, the boldest, now sat stiff as stone. Julian, the most afraid, felt his chest burn with regret. The silence that now filled the room was no longer complicity. It was compressed electricity, gathering, ready to erupt. The revolving door still gleamed behind Adrian, but no one believed he would leave this time. He remained unmoving, standing firm in a room quivering at his presence. And the balance had shifted, not by Celeste's shrieks, not by Sterling's brittle laughter, not by the guard's commands. It was Adrian's stillness, his unyielding silence, that now commanded the hall. A silence not of the defeated, but of someone on the edge of detonation. The crowded room was unnervingly silent. No laughter, no clinking of glasses. Chandeliers still poured light like melting crystal, but that light now felt less like decoration and more like interrogation lamps. Every gaze was fixed on one man. Adrian Cole stood tall, his hand sliding quietly into his coat pocket. A faint vibration of a phone. He answered, voice low but absolute. "Convene the board. 20 minutes." No shouting, no explanation. The short command struck the hall like a hammer. Eyes darted from face to face. The board? Who summoned a board meeting inside a restaurant? Yet no one dared to laugh. Minutes later, a voice cut. Across the crystal air, through the loudspeaker. "Good evening, Mr. Cole. The board is assembled." The sound ripped apart the illusion. Faces that had sneered now wavered. Celeste Marlowe lifted her chin, trying to hold her hauteur, but blood drained from her cheeks in a swift retreat. Sterling Voss leaned deeper into his chair, his hand tightening. Around his glass, the smug grin he had worn all evening collapsing into stone. Adrian didn't turn toward them. His eyes found the reception desk, where Julian Pike stood frozen. His voice rang calm. "Open the complaint records. Put them on the main screen." Julian swallowed, sweat dampening his palms over the keyboard. Above him, the large screen, usually looping slides of wine lists and specials, flashed white. All murmurs died. The sharp clack of a key echoed. Across the screen appeared the blunt words, "Reservation cancelled. Reason: appearance inappropriate for fine dining standards." The silence sucked the air from the room. Guests looked at each other, brows furrowed, lips pressed tight. None spoke, but all understood. This was exactly what they had just witnessed inflicted on Adrian. Julian scrolled, trembling. More lines slid down like indictments etched in cold ink. Complaint filed. Guest humiliated at entrance. Complaint filed. Staff insulted. No action taken. Settlement agreement. Confidential. 4, 5, 6 entries appeared. Closed. Settled. Repeated, stamped like black dots lining a damning record. Celeste shrieked, her voice shrill, clinging to command as if it could strangle fear. "Shut it down! No one has the right—" But her words dissolved into emptiness. Every gaze was locked on the screen. Sterling coughed, wine spilling across his sleeve unnoticed. Guests murmured, not laughter now, but uneasy whispers. Adrian remained still, the center of gravity pulling every eye. He didn't need to speak. The evidence spoke on its own. Then a trembling voice rose from the row of staff pressed against the wall. Lydia Ramos, a young waitress, apron still stained with spilled wine, stepped forward. Her voice cracked but carried across the room. "She called me a stain in the kitchen." The words shattered the hall like a stone through glass. Guests sat upright. A few instinctively set their glasses down, eyes locked on her. She swallowed tears and went on. "I will never forget it. In front of colleagues, in front of guests. As if I wasn't human." Celeste's face drained pale, her lips quivering, but no words came. From the back, another voice emerged, lower, male. "I was cut from shifts because of a small tattoo on my wrist. They said I wasn't fit to be seen in the dining hall." A young waiter, sleeve tugged down over his arm, trembling but eyes resolute. Then another voice joined. And another. Like falling dominoes, employees spoke one after the other. "She told me I should be grateful just to scrub pots. They cut my hours without notice, called it punishment. I was humiliated in front of customers, with no one to defend me." Each confession was a knife. No longer just the screen, the people themselves became witnesses. The dining hall had turned into a tribunal. Guests lowered their heads, some covering their mouths, as if fearing they themselves might be named. Finally, from the kitchen, a broad figure emerged. White chef's coat stained with oil, collar damp with sweat. Chef Anton Hale stepped forward, face heavy, gaze sweeping the hall before fixing on Celeste. "I heard her degrade staff in the kitchen. I heard it all. And I stayed silent." His voice was rough. Each word weighted like the swing of a cleaver. "That silence was my fault. I let it stand because I feared losing my kitchen, my place." More shocking than all the accusations was this. The head chef of Lys Nocturne confessing. That silence had made him complicit. Heads bowed across the room. None dared meet another's eyes. Celeste staggered, eyes darting wildly, fingers clutching at the edge of a table as if grasping the last shard of authority. But the hall had already abandoned her. Adrian Cole lifted his chin, his gaze cutting through the air like a blade. He didn't need to shout. His silence, paired with the evidence laid bare, had already transformed the crystal hall into a courtroom. The hall of Lys Nocturne hung heavy, as if it had just witnessed a silent execution. But everyone knew this wasn't the end. The indictment had only been displayed on the screen. The verdict was yet to come. Adrian Cole slowly sat down at the VIP table in the very center of the hall, the seat reserved for the most powerful patrons. He didn't ask, didn't seek permission. The movement was decisive, as though the chair had always been his. The scene froze. Every eye followed, yet no one dared to stop him. His voice rose deep and steady. 17 complaints, 6 settlements, 1 person responsible. The words weren't loud, but they fell like a gavel in a courtroom. Celeste Marlowe shot to her feet, her whole body trembling with fury, her voice snapping, both defensive and pleading. I did it to protect the restaurant's image. Without it, everything would collapse. Adrian tilted his head, his eyes, like a scalpel stripping the gloss off the walls. No, that is cruelty wearing lipstick. Destruction disguised as standards. His words cut through the air, cold and precise. The room shuddered. Guests who once sided with Celeste now avoided her gaze, as though afraid her false light might stain their own eyes. Sterling Voss cleared his throat, scrambling to recover. We need standards. If anyone can just walk in, then... Adrian turned, his stare slicing across him like a blade. Sterling's throat clamped shut, lips quivering, unable to form another word. The terror of becoming a laughingstock pressed him down, and he bowed his head, hiding his disgrace behind a neatly trimmed beard. Adrian never raised his voice. He only leaned, lifted his phone, and tapped once. A voice rang out through the speakers. HR here. Orders, Mr. Cole? The hall froze. Adrian's reply was curt. Terminate Celeste Marlowe. Effective immediately. A silence thick as stone fell. Then the large screen flickered. Her name appeared, stamped with the words, Access revoked. Contract terminated. A dry ping echoed like the final strike of a hammer. Celeste staggered, gripping the table edge, fingers slipping. Her face went pale as shattered powder. Her mouth opened to protest, but no words came. She turned desperately toward the staff, seeking an ally, but every head bowed or stared straight at Adrian. No eyes turned to her. Lydia Ramos stepped forward first, her hands still trembling but her eyes bright, sharper than ever. She lifted her chin, raised her hand. A simple gesture, but absolute. I've had enough. The air ignited. Another hand rose. Then another. One by one, staff from servers to line cooks lifted their hands. The grand dining hall turned into a tribunal, with a jury made not of wealthy patrons, but of those who had once been made invisible. Guests sat in the frozen silence. No one dared lift a phone. The clicks of cameras ceased. Those who had laughed earlier now bowed their heads, sliding back in their seats, ashamed of their complicity. Celeste's eyes darted frantically. You don't understand. Everything I did was for the brand. Adrian didn't flinch. His voice remained even, each word a bar of metal hitting marble. Luxury is not built on stripping dignity. Luxury is respect. The final 3 words thundered through the air. Luxury is respect. The pause was crushing. Then came the first sound. Applause. 1, 2, 3. It began with the staff, then spread, surging, relentless. Applause roared, like waves filling the hall. Julian Pike, once trembling at the desk, now clapped the hardest, his eyes wet. In them was not only relief, but resolve. He had chosen right for the first time. Sterling Voss kept his head down, refusing to join, his silence damning him as surely as the records on the screen. Chef Anton Hale stepped forward, standing tall in the center, clapping slowly but firmly. His eyes carried both remorse and a new conviction. The truth had finally spoken. Celeste, engulfed by the storm of sound, stumbled back. The chandelier light still glowed above her, but no longer crowned her as the center of power. Now it only exposed her ruin. A woman who had ruled by fear, abandoned and alone, with no one left to stand beside her. Adrian didn't rise. He didn't smile. He sat steady, letting truth and applause do the work. To him this was no personal victory. This was restoration. A system overturned, a culture unmasked, a message carved deep. The entire hall rose. Not a soul dared to leave. They stood because they were compelled, not to honor Celeste, but to acknowledge the reversal of power. A reckoning, naked and undeniable. And in that moment, Lys Nocturne was no longer a crystal palace. It had become a courtroom. And the verdict rang clear. Dignity cannot be bought, and it cannot be buried. The news didn't wait for morning. It exploded that very night. Fragmented clips at first, seconds of guests secretly filming Adrian being escorted out, then footage of him returning, sitting at the VIP table, the big screen flashing those cold complaint records. Pieced together, they told a single story. A CEO humiliated in the very restaurant he had just bought, then flipping the board before an entire hall of witnesses. The hashtag spread like wildfire. Dignity over luxury. The American public, drawn to raw truth, seized on it. Comments piled high. Luxury is respect. 3 short words, now a rallying cry. Inside Lys Nocturne, as the final lights dimmed, the air still smoldered like ashes. Celeste vanished from the system with a keystroke. Sterling Voss, who had once pounded the table to lead laughter, slunk out with his head bowed, not daring to look back. The phones that had once lit up to capture a spectacle now lay dark, for anyone who posted too quickly had already been called out by the internet. Adrian didn't leave at once. He walked into the kitchen, where smoke, oil, and exhaustion clung to the uniforms of the staff. He reached out and clasped Lydia Ramos's trembling hand. "Thank you for speaking." The young waitress broke into tears, choking. "I thought no one would ever listen." Adrian simply replied, "Now they do." The moment rippled outward. Anton Hale, the head chef who had confessed his silence, stood taller, freed of a hidden weight. Julian Pike, drenched in sweat, exhaled long, realizing fear no longer sealed his lips. The silence in the kitchen was no longer submission. It was released. The next morning, Cole Hospitality Group issued a brief statement. All Lys Nocturne staff will receive full scholarships in culinary and management training. The whistleblower policy is open to the public. All prior confidential settlements are nullified. No boasting. No marketing spin. Just changes, cold and factual. Outside, guests looked inward. Those who had once sat beneath chandeliers, silent while others were erased, now saw their own faces in the mirror. The haunting question. That night, if I had stood up, would things have been different? Lys Nocturne remained open, still poured wine, still lit candles on the tables. But no one entered without remembering the night Adrian Cole stood unshaken in that hall and uttered 3 words. Luxury is respect. And the lingering taste was not of meat or wine. It was the taste of truth. A restaurant can take away your food, but if it takes away your dignity, then its luxury is nothing but a hollow shell. If a hall glittering with crystal light can drive 100 people into silence before an act of humiliation, then the question is not only for them, it is for all of us. When you see someone treated as invisible, will you stay silent or will you speak? If you believe dignity matters more than money, subscribe to Talk Story to spread the stories that truly reach the heart.